Okay, we are back together, and what I want to say is, um, as I adjust this a little bit more, yeah, um, we are going to start chapter 2, and chapter 2 is about language acquisition and the theories about how children learn language. Now, I'm going to move this. That doesn't work real well. I think I like it better over on this side. Yeah. Um, that's good. I was trying to keep my door out of it. And I kind of like this maybe a little bit more. Yeah, I do. Um, and you have learned about the anatomy and the physiology. You know that you have to have good muscle tone, you have to have core strength, you have to be able to generate a breath stream in order to speak. Um, your brain works together, crossing information from one hemisphere to the other. You send information to Wernicke's area, then on to Broca's area. We use those cranial nerves. You've learned about how information, um, especially when we talked about Hackett, how we take information, we can take information from our past, we can bring that information forward, we can add it to information. We have memory skills, we have critical thinking, we can problem solve. So we have all of the capabilities to be great communicators. Now that's if there's typical development. You get into some different areas when there's not. So then now we move on to language acquisition and just how do we learn language? That's chapter 2. Then we'll move on to chapter 3. Then we will move on to chapter 4. The next exam will cover chapters 2, 3, and 4. Let me say that again. The next exam will cover chapter 2, 3, and 4. Okay? I do not know when that's going to be just yet. And as we get a little bit closer, I'll have a better idea. What is important, though, is that we have 2 exams before we go home for Thanksgiving break. Because as I understand it, we don't come back. I will probably be in the office, but you will continue the course online, as I understand it. Okay? So we have to get 2, 3, and 4. Then we'll have 5, 6, and 7. And the final will be 8 and 9. I will say that the test grades were really pretty good. I was pretty pleased with your grades. Also, some of you have not turned in the sentence with the 3 words, vase, morning, and flowers. You haven't emailed me that sentence for 5 points. I think some of you maybe have even forgotten to send uh, the information about what language is, what it does for us, how children learn language. That one was assigned very, very early, and that needs to come to me via email if you want extra points. I will not accept anything now past Friday. Friday the 18th will be the last day that I'll accept those sentences. Okay, today is Monday the 14th. Okay? All right, let's talk about language acquisition and the theories about language acquisition. We know individuals who are born with talents, and we know individuals who, because of their talents, Maybe you know someone in high school who got a scholarship to play golf in college, full ride. A swimmer, a basketball player, football player, a gymnast. The athletes um, do well with getting scholarships. Could be baseball. We also know individuals who are very talented artistically, and that can be in drawing, painting, it could be in music. And if those individuals did not have that genetic makeup, they maybe wouldn't be as successful. Or if they didn't have the influence of a very special person from their life to encourage them, who supported them, maybe they wouldn't have been as successful as they turned out to be. But we know that um, some skills are considered to be purely genetic. There is definitely a genetic makeup, and but we also know that, golly, the influence of the environment is really important. Here in Muncie, I remember several years ago there was a basketball player at Muncie Central, and this young man was good. This has been many years ago. And everybody was saying, this kid's going to get a full ride scholarship to some college. He's good enough to play pro. So genetically, we've got these skills. He's good with eye-hand coordination. He's very athletic. He just, it seems to have been born with a ball in his hand, okay? And then, maybe this kid came from a family that didn't have a lot of money. Maybe this young man's father passed away and he had younger siblings, and mom was working, but she couldn't make ends meet, and he had to go to work. His grades suffered. He became depressed, maybe kind of got in with the wrong crowd, started skipping school, and before you know it, no future there in basketball, no future in college, and all of that talent was influenced in a negative way by the environment. Think about the Tiger Woods of the world. Tiger Woods has genetically had the skills, and his father was right there with him along the way. So Michael Jordan's, Kobe Bryant's, the Simone Biles. Ooh, I'm not sure I said that name right, but she's the Olympic athlete. My gosh, that girl is like no other. Well, she definitely had the skills, and she definitely had the influence, I believe, from her grandparents or from a family who adopted her. And those athletes in gymnastics many times leave their home, leave their families, travel halfway across the United States, and live with families who maybe own the Olympic arena where they go and practice and mentor them along the way. So they sacrifice a tremendous amount in order to do that. So there is the genetic component and the influence of the environment, in her case, in a very positive way. Um, it used to be the trend or the thought that language was taught by your parents. They taught you language. Well, I'll tell you, my parents didn't teach me language. We didn't sit down after dinner and they said, okay, now we're going to work on irregular verbs, or now we're going to work on narratives. We're going to work on your vocabulary. Uh, that didn't happen at my house. That would have been almost weird if it happened at my house like that. First of all, my father, dad, was the youngest of 7 children. His father passed away when he was 9. He was raised by his brothers who could not handle him, and he dropped out of school. He doesn't have, at that time, my grandmother, who was just this sweet, kind, loving little lady, couldn't handle him, I'm sure. And my two uncles who were older, I'm sure, tried to handle him and they couldn't. And he quit school. He quit school. Here's this person who had some decent cognitive ability, but the environment took him down a different path. Now, he could read, he could write, he could do math, he owned a small business. So it wasn't that he didn't have the capability, the environment, the influence of the environment is what got him. Well, he wasn't going to teach me a language. My mother was 13 out of 14 children. She was pretty much raised by the older children in that family. Nobody sat down and said, let's talk about spelling, or let's see if we can create some sentences that are grammatically correct. It didn't happen. And so, and in some cases, parents aren't the best teachers for their own children. I would not have been the best teacher for my daughter. I think I'm a pretty good teacher, but it would not have worked for my daughter. I wanted to be her mom, not be the taskmaster to get her to do her schoolwork. Now, what's interesting today, we've sort of come full circle because many parents are doing homeschooling for these kiddos. And it's very different. That type of schooling is very, very different. And I'll tell you, my daughter is homeschooling my grandson. She got a program in Ohio, Connections Academy, I think, and they do follow the Ohio State educational standards, which is good. But it is so different, such a different format for learning that my grandson is really struggling and he's not feeling success, that's for sure. Um, Last Thursday was my birthday, and so he called and sang happy birthday to me, and he asked me how old I was. He calls me Yaya. Yaya, how old are you? And I said, I'm 66. He goes, I got a 64 on a test. You know, that's an F. I said, oh, I know, but you know, one time I got a 56 on a test, and that was an F. So it's happened to everybody. But my daughter says it's so different. We're trying to adjust to the different format. And she said, Mom, sometimes I don't even know what they want. So we've kind of come back to some homeschooling, and we're trying to meet the needs of our children in this time of pandemic. She was afraid to send him back to school. The state of Ohio couldn't decide how they were going to format the classroom. She was afraid he'd get started and then they would close and they would have lost time. So she's given it her best shot, and she's not a teacher by education. So she's trying. And my grandson's doing pretty well. School's not easy for him. It's not easy. He was a late bloomer. He's a very sensitive child, and he feels the failure. That's for darn sure. We're going to also talk about the two major classifications or the two major theories. And when I asked my face-to-face class if they were familiar with nature versus nurture, they said that they certainly were. And we know that the nativists, or the biological nativists is what they are called, they feel that children are genetically predisposed to talk. Well, I happen to believe that children are wired to talk too, but that's their primary focus. They feel that maybe a little bit of the environment might come into play, but the major focus is the genetics. Now, on the other hand, we have the behaviorists, and the behaviorists are looking at observable behaviors, not attention span, memory. They're looking at something that can be observed. Now, the nativists think that all children are born with this reservoir of information, this genetic makeup, and all we have to do is tap into it. and language is learned that way with a little smidgen of the environment. The behaviorists, on the other hand, think, the well is empty. They're a clean slate. The behaviorists say, nope, we have to teach them. And they learn by imitation. They learn by imitation. Now, we also know through the behaviorists that they feel that the child must be ready to acquire language, and I think that's true. The child has to be developmentally ready, developmentally mature to learn. They have to have the right mental capacity. They have to be able to take in information receptively and interpret it. And the influence for the behaviorists is on the environment with a little bit of genetics. Now think about, well, first of all, when I went to kindergarten 60 years ago, um, I remember. I remember walking in the door. I remember the room. I remember some of the children. I remember getting my picture taken. Um, and what we did was cut, color, and paste in kindergarten. It was half a day. We took a nap. I remember cookies. And we went home. Now, I want you to realize I was a 16-year-old senior in high school because my birthday is September 10th. So I started kindergarten early. And it was fine. Developmentally, I was ready for kindergarten. But girls develop a little bit earlier, they mature a little bit earlier, their language skills are a little bit better than boys, but boys catch up. That's not the problem. But I do remember when I worked for Steps going into different daycares and places where I'd see this tiny little boy sitting over at the table, and you could tell he had tears on his cheeks and he missed his mommy and he was small for his age. And I thought, and he's looking around like he's somewhat confused, and I thought, oh, this little pumpkin is not developmentally ready for kindergarten. But mom and dad probably had to go to work. They couldn't afford daycare. And for some children, it's a safety issue. They go to a daycare, they go to kindergarten, and kindergarten's all day now. And I don't think they let them take a nap. They may rest, but I'm not so sure naps are part of it. But it's safe. They go to school, they might get a breakfast, they might get a free lunch, and it's a safe place for them to be as well. But you could just see this little guy. He just developmentally was not ready to go to kindergarten. And it's so academic. They're reading, they're doing some basic math. I can remember River had a picture of a pie and it was cut in half. And um, I think they had one half plus one half equals a whole, or they were talking about a fourth. They're learning to spell their name, write their name. They're reading. Um, what else was this? They had spelling tests. Spell the word kindergarten. Well, I'm telling you, not all children, even typically developing children, are mature enough for kindergarten at that time. So then we force them into kindergarten for whatever reason, and by the second grade, they're burnt out. You know, and I've read articles about burnout and increased anxiety at third grade. You know, um, they're not ready to learn. You have to have the basics: sound letter association, phonemic awareness, sounding out words, um, and you build on that. You build on that. But what happens, these immature kiddos are in kindergarten and they're not developmentally ready. Genetically, they may be, but environmentally, socially, they're just not. And so They do sort of okay in kindergarten. First grade, they struggled a little bit. They didn't have the good foundational skills. Get to second grade, it's a little bit worse. By third grade, they're coming into the clinic for language testing. Some of these kids are just not ready to go to kindergarten. Nativists versus the behaviorists. And so when we got to the 60s and the 70s, we thought, oops, okay, we need to look at this a little bit differently. And we decided that maybe there was something about this nature versus nurture. Again, nativist genetics with a little bit of the environment, and the behaviorists who say, nah, it's the environment with a little bit of genetics. So the behaviorists, they say language is learned. The child must have the oral structure. Those structures must be developed. They must have the maturation, and they must be ready to learn. You must be ready to learn, and the emphasis is on environment. But we do know that genetics will play a part. We know that we are wired to talk, and that in spite of sometimes the poorest environment in the world, we will talk, but you've got to hear it to be able to imitate it. The human brain is specialized for language. And, you know, we talked about Hackett and the origin of species and what humans are able to do. There is no species that can do what we can do. The memory, the abstract thinking, the problem solving, sharing information with each other, asking questions, embedding sentences, bringing information from the past forward. All of that plays into what we call brain plasticity. Brain plasticity. And this plasticity provides the brain with flexibility and adaptability. And you have that corpus callosum that takes information from one side of the brain over to the other side of the brain, and we're adapting, we're thinking, we're contemplating, okay, is that right? Is that wrong? The human brain has the ability to change constantly. Brain plasticity, for sure. Worked with a family where the little girl was adopted from a third world country, came to the United States, lived in an orphanage in horrible conditions. And after she was here for a while, and she had some language issues, not so much speaking the language, but I'm talking about that letter sound association, phonemic awareness, generating sentences, vocabulary. And she struggled with some of those, and it came down to some brain plasticity because she got a diagnosis of fetal alcohol syndrome. So there were issues with brain plasticity. And when I talked to her neuropsychologist, I thought, you know, it's, and I said to her, it's some brain plasticity. And she said, you are so right. The mother was hurt, and you know, she was she's an educator, but it hurt her heart. That's her girl, that's her baby, and she wants her to be able to live independently and get married and have a family. And school has been hard for this young girl because of her diagnosis and difficulty with brain plasticity. It's a way that we organize words, and we select information. We choose information that works, and we discard information that doesn't work. We can function and think with speed and accuracy. Again, brain plasticity, because our brain adapts. Words that we are able to retrieve that we have stored in our memory, we are able to retrieve those words quicker because we've learned them earlier or at an early age. If you have a pet and it's a ferret, and your child grew up with a ferret, then they know what a ferret is. But maybe one of their friends comes over and they go, "What's that?" And your child says, "It's a ferret." And then you maybe talk about other animals that are within that family. Well, your child learned that word early, and your child is able to use that word appropriately. Whereas a child who has not learned that word is not able to do so. Um, when we work on language for our kids, and I'm not talking about standard English, or I mean American English, yeah, as a language. I'm talking about um, uh, our ability to learn to read, to speak, for sure, to write, to spell, to do narratives. That's all, to remember, to think abstractly, to make decisions, which is some executive function up here. All of that is language. And our kiddos in school who struggle with language processing, who struggle with reading, who struggle to spell, who struggle to write, if you are able to remediate or to improve one domain, many times you're also able to improve another domain because all of these language areas are intertwined. And so it's overwhelming to the child, and it could be overwhelming to you as the service provider. Where do I begin? How do I prioritize? But if you are able to improve one area of language, many times that crosses over into another area. We know that there's a strong support for genetic components. We also know that families will tell you that their child um, has the same kind of trouble they did in school. Let's say a child comes into the clinic to be tested, excuse me, and um, I talk to the parent and I say, okay, can you tell me a little bit about why you're here? Well, he did really well in kindergarten. Then we got to first grade, and well, he did have a little trouble with sounds. And he got to first grade. They passed him to first grade, and it was a little harder. Reading didn't come along easily. Got to second grade, a little more trouble with spelling. Yeah, he says that spelling, those words just don't make sense to him. Then he gets to third grade, and by third grade, they are reading to learn. Hopefully, they've laid the foundation in those early grades, and they've built on those skills, and now they're reading to learn. And this little guy doesn't have the foundation, so he's struggling. Maybe he's been misdiagnosed in school, dyslexia, language processing tests. Maybe he's got some auditory processing issues. The school system tested him and he falls through the cracks. He's not he's not low enough. His skills are too high, but he's only 2 points away from getting help. We see that happen over and over again. So they come in and the parent says, "Oh, he talks just like I do. I had an R problem. He has an R problem. Uh, I didn't do real well in school. School was hard for me. I had trouble reading. I had trouble spelling. He's just like me." There's that predisposition, the inclination for the child to have a similar issue as the parent. Um, and it goes the other ways too. How many, and I've been watching football recently, so glad football's back on. The athletes Okay, their dad was a great football player, and they play football, and maybe the same position, and maybe with the same success. And the dad became a coach, and the son became a coach. So it works two ways, you know. But there is a predisposition. It's not like your eye color, your hair color, but there is a predisposition um, for um, a child to have similar weaknesses and similar strengths too. We have the neural mechanism that supports language and learning, and these are genetically transmitted to our offspring for sure. Okay, I'm trying to remember what I shared with the class this morning because I saw them this morning and we started on this chapter. The theorist most closely associated with the nativists is Noam Chomsky. And Noam Chomsky is still alive. He's got to be a brilliant man because occasionally I'll get a text and it's about some political position that he has, or he's talking about politics. And his early work, of course, was in the area of language, but he is the one who is best known as the nativist. The nativist interpretation of language is that it's universal among humans, and it's unique to us for sure. Unless you have some sort of mental limitation, some physical limitation, you will learn language. You have the capability to learn language. In chapter 1, I do believe we talked about the evidence of chimpanzees and apes, and that we are the only species who have the capability to acquire and use language like we do. And that gets reinforced in this particular chapter. Hackett's work definitely gets reinforced. Also, another basic assumption of the nativists and why language is acquired so quickly in the child's life is definitely due to the genetics. The behaviorists say that language is learned. Well, that learning takes time. They learn language over time. Certainly they do. But the nativists say they learn it so quickly because of the genetic component. Okay, we've also talked in a previous chapter about the rules and the structure of relationships between words. Do you know what that's called? Do you remember? All languages have rules to indicate the structural relationships among words and sentences. Do you know what that is? Which one of those areas? Is it semantics, syntax, pragmatics, or morphology? Do you know? Syntax. So one of the concepts of the nativists was the language acquisition device. And this concept, according to Chomsky, is the understanding of language development. It is what they say is there's this reservoir, and this reservoir is filled with all this endless information about the rules of language structure. And what it takes is somebody who can tap into that. A language acquisition device takes this syntactic information and they generate grammar from that child's native language. And the existence of the language acquisition device has been widely debated. And you're going to find in research, oh, so-and-so said this, and then there's another researcher who said, I don't believe that. There's always somebody who wants to debate that issue. Well, what it came down to was Chomsky says it's transformational generative grammar. And if you look at page 36 in your text, at the bottom, figure 2.2, how are we doing on time? Figure 2.2, it says transformational generative grammar. And this is from Chomsky, from the nativists. And what you're doing is you're taking an image, an idea. You have this idea, and that is the deep structure of your grammar, of your thought. And then you're going to transform that into a surface structure by using word order, grammatical rules, and by doing that, the next person's going to understand it. It's pretty basic. Chomsky says transformational generative grammar means, this isn't going to surprise you, that we can generate unlimited number of grammatically acceptable sentences. Sounds like Hockett, because we have an idea, we have a thought, and we use word order, and we use grammatical rules, and we bring that to the surface. And then others can understand us. And that has been debated by others. The nativists believe that if language was purely learned, you'd have a more conscious understanding of what you're doing. You would consciously say, oh, let's see, I could embed a sentence here. Oh no, I need to use an irregular verb because the other one doesn't work. And let's see, how should I say that? I don't know. But you would consciously do this. We don't consciously do it. We go from the deep level to the surface level just like that. And that might be why it's been debated a little bit. I don't know. But we do it, and we do it quickly. Now, the behaviorists, they focus on observable behaviors. Observable behaviors. Not memory, not attention, but something that an individual does, an action that they do with their language patterns. Language is learned by imitation, reinforcement, and successive approximations toward adult language. And I happen to believe that. I think children do learn by imitation. And let me tell you about a story. A child came in to see me in a center that I was working in, and I was working in early intervention, and I had, at that time, I wasn't making home visits, so the kids came to see me. So this little guy came in, and oh my gosh, just in the conversation, he was somewhat difficult to understand. His language was, the syntax was a problem. I think vocabulary was a problem, but he was cussing. It's like this 2-year-old is saying cuss words. And it's like, whoa, okay, where's he? I know where he's hearing it, but who's doing it? So after the session, I talked to Mom about what we did and what we worked on, and you always want to share with your parents what you're doing, and they can do some carryover at home. And so I said, who in the home is cussing? I said, he's picking up these words, and he doesn't understand them. He doesn't know what they mean as such, but somebody has reinforced it. Oh, you shouldn't say that, or they laugh about it. Well, it's not funny to hear a 2-year-old using the F word. There's nothing funny about that. And, she said, I don't know. I don't know who's using those words. I've heard him, but I've told his dad to quit doing that if he's the one doing that. And I said, well, the best way to extinguish that behavior is to quit doing it. And those words will just go away because he's not getting the reinforcement. And so we finished our meeting, and they were going to go home, and A few minutes later, I was doing things in my office and I was going to have lunch. So I was going to go down to the restroom and then I was going to get my lunch. And so I went into the restroom, and in the stall next to me was the mom and the child. And she was talking to him not in a very kind way, and she was cussing. I heard the same words that he used. She came out of the stall and I went, "Hi, hi. Yeah, I heard those words." I never said anything else. Well, we don't want to admit that because it's not a good trait to have, but that's where he was getting it. So children do learn by imitation, reinforcement, and successive approximation toward adult language. Now, do I think that there has to be some good genetics? Well, yes, I think that there has to be some typical development for sure. If the child doesn't have typically developing structures, if there is a significant hearing loss, if there's some type of brain damage or trauma to the brain, well, yes. But I will tell you, I do think that you have to have a combination of genetics and the environment. One of the more controversial aspects of the behaviorist view is that children are passive during the process of learning language. They're passive. I don't think children are passive, that's for sure. But remember, this is somebody else that says, I don't know. I want to challenge you on that point. Children begin life where their language tanks are on empty. Now remember, the native has said, oh, you're born with all this genetic stuff and you're able to do this. We're just going to tap into it as we go on. The behaviorists say, you have nothing. You're starting from the bottom up. And as they become language users, it's because of the experiences provided by the language models in the environment. There's that environmental component for those behaviorists. All behaviorists believe that the environment is critical and the most important factor in the acquisition formula. Now, they do believe that, but then they'll say, well, maybe there's a little bit of the environment, okay? The theorist who is best known as a behaviorist is B.F. Skinner. And did you know that B.F. Skinner he's a psychologist, I think, and he was once the chairman of the psychology counseling department at IU many, many years ago, which I thought was interesting. But he is the theorist most closely associated with the behaviorist interpretation of speech and language development. He viewed speech as a learned behavior because he viewed virtually all behaviors as learned according to operant conditioning. Operant conditioning. Now, what time do we have? Okay, it's almost 45 minutes. So I think this would be a good place to stop with operant conditioning. It's page 26 in the PowerPoint, and I think this is a good place to stop. And we will start with operant conditioning for Chapter 2A. This first lecture is Chapter 2. Chapter 2. The next lecture will be Chapter 2A. It will be the second part of Chapter 2. Yeah. Okay? So we are going to begin with operant conditioning. I'm going to make a note so I don't get confused for online. Okay. Hey, well, it's been fun. I kind of like this stuff, so it's been fun. I hope you find it interesting as much as I do. And I'm going to stop and I'll do an upload. And I encourage you to keep up with these videos. Don't wait until it's time to take a test and say, where are the videos? You're going to perform better on an exam if you follow them along a little at a time. Okay, it really does make a difference. Okay, guys, I'm going to stop this recording at 45 minutes. Bye.